At exactly 4:30 in the morning, Washington time, a single post appeared on Truth Social. Its message was short, but it hit like an earthquake. Effective immediately, the United States will impose an additional 10% tariff on all Canadian imports, over and above what Canada is already paying. No warning, no leaks. Just a message from the most powerful office in the world. Within minutes, markets reacted. The Canadian dollar began to slide. Futures in New York and Toronto flashed red. And by sunrise, the world's most trusted trade alliance between the United States and Canada was suddenly in question. For more than 3 decades, the two nations have built one of the most tightly woven economic relationships on Earth. Every single day, billions of dollars flow across their border: energy, steel, technology, agriculture. Now, all of that was in jeopardy. What could push the United States to turn against its closest ally? And what might this decision mean for the balance of global power? The world was about to find out. When the announcement spread, markets didn't hesitate. They fell. Investors dumped Canadian assets, commodity prices plunged, and within hours, the White House confirmed all trade talks with Ottawa were suspended indefinitely. The official reason was brief: unacceptable retaliatory measures from Canada. But beneath the headlines, something deeper was happening. A classified report from the National Economic Security Council had warned that Canada's counter-tariffs were neutralizing Washington's trade leverage. In short, Canada had found a way to fight back, and Trump took it personally. The result was immediate chaos. Factories paused shipments, auto parts piled up at the border, and in less than 24 hours, decades of trade stability began to unravel. For the global economy, the timing couldn't have been worse. Energy prices were already rising, inflation was biting, and supply chains were fragile after years of pandemic shocks. Now, the North American trade engine was stalling. The move sent shockwaves across the Atlantic and Pacific alike. Analysts from London to Singapore called it a warning shot heard worldwide. Was this an isolated decision, or the opening move in a new economic war? Publicly, the administration claimed it was defending American industry. Privately, insiders told a very different story. This was about China. For months, intelligence reports had warned of Beijing's expanding footprint in the Canadian economy. From clean energy to critical minerals, Chinese firms were quietly gaining ground. In Washington's eyes, that meant risk and a direct challenge to U.S. dominance in North America. If Canada becomes China's gateway, one advisor told the president, America loses its strategic control over the continent. Trump's decision to raise tariffs wasn't just retaliation. It was containment, a signal to Ottawa that flirting with Beijing's investments came with a cost. Behind closed doors, the National Security Council drafted what they called Plan B, monitoring Chinese investments in Canada, tightening technology exports, and even preparing sanctions on firms acting as intermediaries. It was no longer about trade deficits. It was about influence, about who gets to shape the next century's economy. The United States wasn't protecting products. It was protecting power. In Ottawa, shock quickly turned into strategy. The Prime Minister's emergency meeting stretched through the night. By dawn, one thing was clear. If America was going to weaponize trade, Canada needed new options. Within days, high-level envoys opened talks with China, Japan, and South Korea. Beijing was the fastest to respond, offering investments in green energy, digital infrastructure, and ports along Canada's Pacific coast. Ottawa framed the talks as economic diversification. But to Washington, it looked like betrayal. Canadian officials knew the risks. Closer ties with Beijing could mean political pressure later. But in that moment, they needed stability and leverage. For the first time in decades, Canada was reshaping its role on the global stage. No longer a quiet partner in the American system, but a player with choices. The world's friendliest border had just become a fault line in the struggle for global influence. The shock didn't stop at the border. It rippled across oceans. European markets repriced trade risks. Asian firms began redrawing shipping routes. And the International Monetary Fund warned that prolonged instability between the US and Canada could ripple through global supply chains. Oil shipments slowed, semiconductor exports were delayed, and multinational corporations began drafting contingency plans, shifting manufacturing to Latin America and Southeast Asia. For the global economy, the implications were massive. North America's integration had been the backbone of globalization. Now, cracks were showing. This was the moment, one analyst said, when the world realized that even allies can become competitors overnight. The tariff had become more than policy. It was a symbol of fragmentation, of fear, and of a changing order. While Washington and Ottawa argued, Beijing moved. Within weeks, China tightened export controls on rare earth minerals, critical ingredients in defense systems and green energy technologies. It was a direct counter to U.S. semiconductor restrictions. The message was clear. China could fight economic wars, too. Trump called the move a moral disgrace, but for Beijing, it was leverage. By deepening trade ties with Canada and supporting new Pacific infrastructure routes, China was expanding its reach quietly, efficiently, and strategically. The same global trade network that once served America's interests was now being re-engineered in Beijing's favor. As Washington used tariffs to punish, China used investment to persuade. And across the world, nations began to notice who was offering the better deal. Economists began to use a new phrase, the Cold War of economics. Not fought with armies, but with markets. Not over borders, but over influence. Every tariff, every sanction, every trade deal had become a weapon. The United States sought to protect its system. China sought to replace it. In between were countries like Canada, forced to navigate a world where neutrality was no longer an option. Choose your partner, or be left behind. That's the quiet rule of the new age. As global blocs form, the Western alliance versus the Eastern economic sphere, the post-Cold War balance that once defined prosperity is eroding. Trade has become the front line, and the 10% tariff on Canada was one of the first open battles in this new global contest. A tariff. Just 10%, a small number, but a decision that may be remembered as the spark that redefined global power. For the United States, it signaled a turning inward, an era where even friends could face economic fire. For Canada, it was a call to adapt, to diversify, and to survive. And for China, it was an opening, to quietly weave its influence through the fractures of the Western system. In the years ahead, historians may look back at this moment, not as a trade dispute, but as the first domino in a chain of events that transformed the architecture of global economics. The tariff war has shown that power no longer lies in armies or weapons, but in data, supply chains, and trade corridors. The global order is shifting. The question now is not who will win, but who will adapt fast enough to survive. This is the Macrosphere, decoding the economics of power.